Title: The Most Disastrous Olympics Ever Held. Description: The 1904 St. Louis Olympics were so chaotic, they almost ended the games forever. From a marathon winner who rode in a car, to athletes being fed rat poison and brandy. This is the unbelievable true story of the worst Olympics in history. 0, 0, 0. Imagine the Olympic Games, but everything that could possibly go wrong does. I'm not talking about a small hiccup or a minor scandal. I'm talking about a full-blown catastrophic disaster that almost destroyed the entire Olympic movement. Welcome to you, 1904 St. Louis Olympics. The most chaotic, bizarre, and frankly, the worst games in history. 0 to 7 first. Let's set the scene. The 1904 games weren't even supposed to be in St. Louis. They were awarded to Chicago. But St. Louis was hosting the World's Fair, and they basically threatened to hold their own, better-funded athletic competition if they didn't get the Olympics. So, the games were moved and became a sideshow to the massive fair. This meant they were stretched out over almost 5 months. To make matters worse, the organizers decided to host something called Anthropology Days. This was a horrifyingly racist event, where they gathered people from indigenous tribes and forced them to compete in savage versions of Olympic sports, just to prove the superiority of white athletes. It was a shameful start to an already doomed event. 128, but the absolute pinnacle of this disaster was the marathon. It was a perfect storm of terrible decisions. The race was held on a brutally hot August afternoon, with temperatures soaring above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or 32 Celsius. The course was run on dusty, unpaved country roads. Every time a car or horse passed, it kicked up massive clouds of dust, choking the runners and making it nearly impossible to breathe. You'd think with these conditions, they'd provide plenty of water, right? Wrong. The organizers, in a bizarre attempt to study purposeful dehydration, set up only one water station for the entire 25-mile course. 1. It was a recipe for absolute chaos. To 27 out of 32 runners who started the race, only 14 actually finished. The rest succumbed to the heat, the dust, and the dehydration. One runner, William Garcia, was found lying on the side of the road, nearly dead. The dust had coated his esophagus and stomach, causing severe hemorrhaging. He was hospitalized for days and almost didn't make it, and he was one of the lucky ones. The race was a public health crisis masquerading as a sporting event. 3:02 now. Let's talk about the winner. The first man to cross the finish line was an American named Fred Lorzay. The crowd went wild. He was crowned the champion, and Alice Roosevelt, the president's daughter, was about to place a wreath on his head. But just as she was about to do it, an official ran up and shouted that Lors was an imposter. It turned out that after about 9 miles, Lors had started cramping up. So, what did he do? He simply hopped into his manager's car and rode for the next 11 miles. The car eventually broke down, so he got out and jogged the rest of the way to the finish line, waving to the cheering crowds as if he'd run the whole thing. When confronted, he claimed it was all just a joke. A joke. He was banned from the sport for life, although the ban was lifted a year later, and he actually went on to win the Boston Marathon in 1905. For real this time. Las 4:16. So with the fake winner disqualified, the victory went to the next guy to stumble across the line. Thomas Hicks. But Hicks's story is just as wild. He was fading badly around the halfway mark. His trainers, refusing to give him water, decided on a different approach. They injected him with strychnine sulfate. Yes, you heard that right. Strychnine, a common rat poison in small doses, was used as a stimulant. When that started to wear off, they gave him another dose, along with a large glass of brandy and a raw egg. He was basically hallucinating by the end, his legs barely moving. His trainers had to physically carry him over the finish line, holding him up as his feet shuffled through the motions. He had won, but he lost 8 pounds during the race and was so delirious he could barely stand. This is widely considered the first recorded case of performance-enhancing drugs in the modern Olympics. 5:27, and the weirdness doesn't stop there. Let's talk about Felix Carvajal, a Cuban postman. He raised money to get to the Olympics by running around his town square. He gambled all that money away in New Orleans and had to hitchhike the rest of the way to St. Louis. He showed up to the marathon starting line in his street clothes, a long-sleeved shirt, long pants, and heavy walking shoes. Someone took pity on him and cut his pants off at the knee. During the race, I got hungry, so he stopped in an orchard and started eating some apples. Unfortunately, the apples were rotten, giving him terrible stomach cramps. He had to lie down and take a nap on the side of the road before continuing. Despite all this, he still managed to finish in 4th place. Imagine what he could have done with a proper meal and running shorts. 6:33, then there was Len Tao, one of 2 runners from South Africa. He was a Swana man who had been part of a Boer War exhibit at the World S Fair. He was a skilled long-distance runner, but he had one major problem during the race that no one else faced. At one point, he was chased nearly a mile off course by a pack of aggressive wild dogs. A mile. He still managed to finish in 9th place, which is absolutely incredible when you think about it. Being chased by dogs is not exactly part of standard marathon training. 7:18. The list of oddities just keeps going. The swimming events took place in a murky, artificial lake that was also used for the World's Fair's livestock exhibitions. Yes, the same water cattle were wading in. Unsurprisingly, many of the swimmers came down with severe intestinal illnesses, and at least 4 of them died from typhoid within a year. The gymnastics events were a mess, with the Amateur Athletic Union and the Olympic Committee having a feud over what the rules even were. They ended up holding 2 separate championships on the same day. Les Ochoso, with all this chaos, the fake winner, the drugged-up champion, the dog chases, the rotten apples, and the generally life-threatening conditions. It's no surprise that the 1904 St. Louis Games were considered an absolute failure. They were poorly attended, poorly organized, and just plain dangerous. The international participation was a joke. Of the 650 athletes, nearly 580 were from the United States. Many events were little more than the American National Championships. Las 8:35 Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympics, was so disgusted that he didn't even attend. Afterward, the reputation of the Olympic Games was in tatters. Many thought the movement was dead, and that the St. Louis disaster would be the final nail in the coffin. It was such a debacle that the Games were unheld in the United States again for another 28 years. Thankfully, the 1908 London Games and the 1912 Stockholm Games were huge successes, bringing back the prestige and saving the Olympic movement from collapsing under the weight of its most absurd chapter. The 1904 Olympics serve as a wild, hilarious, and terrifying reminder of how not to host the world's greatest sporting event. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this trip into chaotic sports history, be sure to like and subscribe for more.